The business class cabin is silent before takeoff, bathed in cold, clinical light. A man in a faded shirt sits quietly, holding his young daughter close. A sharp-eyed CEO strides in, receiving fawning attention from the crew. She glances at the man, her brow furrowing with disdain at his presence. "This section isn't for people like you," she sneers. Some passengers chuckle. The man doesn't react, simply covering his sleeping child. As the plane taxis, the engine sound shifts into a violent metallic grinding. The captain's voice breaks over the intercom, trembling. "Is there a pilot on board?" The man is Daniel Cross, 38 years old, a single father whose hands are calloused from years of working as an airport maintenance technician at a small regional hub. To the world, he is just a shadow in the background, a man in grease-stained coveralls who disappears into the hangar at dusk. But to his 7-year-old daughter Lily, he is the giant who carries the sun on his shoulders. Lily clings to his hand, her knuckles white. She has always been terrified of the sky, a fear born from a mother she can barely remember, who left on a flight and never came back. Daniel is there, leaning in close, whispering stories of cloud kingdoms and wind spirits to keep her heart from racing. He chose this red-eye flight because it was the only one he could afford after working double shifts for 3 months straight. He saved every penny to take Lily to see her grandmother, and he booked the very back of the premium cabin, a rare splurge, just so Lily could have a bit more space to breathe and feel safe. Daniel looks out the window, watching the ground crew finish their checks. He knows exactly which bolts they are checking because he's tightened thousands of them himself. His mind is a library of flight manuals and engine schematics. He notices a slight hesitation in the movement of the fuel truck driver, a tiny detail that only a veteran would catch. But on the surface, he looks like a man who has lost everything. His jacket is frayed at the cuffs, and his shoes are scuffed from miles of walking on concrete runways. He feels the weight of the cabin's luxury, the soft leather, the smell of premium spirits, and it feels alien to him, a stark contrast to the grease and grit of his daily life. Then comes Victoria Hale, 32, the powerhouse president of Hale Aviation Tech, a global conglomerate that designs the very software running this aircraft. She is a woman who measures human value by the crispness of a suit and the rarity of a watch. She steps onto the plane, smelling of expensive Dior perfume and cold, sharp ambition. Behind her, a pair of assistants scramble to handle her designer luggage, their faces masks of subservience. When she sees Daniel, his old flannel shirt, his tired, sunken eyes, his daughter's cheap, matted stuffed bunny, she feels an immediate sense of pollution in her premium environment. "Excuse me," Victoria says, her voice cutting through the cabin's low hum like a razor. She doesn't speak to Daniel. She speaks at him, addressing the lead flight attendant. "I believe there's been a significant error in seating. This man is making me incredibly uncomfortable. This is a business environment, not a daycare for the underprivileged. Surely there's a seat for him further back in the main cabin. I pay for exclusivity, not to be part of a social experiment." Daniel looks up, his gaze steady despite the exhaustion. He doesn't look angry. He looks like a man who has heard this 1,000 times before. He has learned that silence is often the best armor. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he says softly, his voice gravelly but polite. "My daughter has severe anxiety. She finally fell asleep. We paid for these seats, and we just want to get home quietly. We won't be in your way." Victoria lets out a cold, sharp laugh that sounds like breaking glass. "Get home? Do you think this is a public bus? This cabin is for people who contribute to the industry, people who build these machines, not those who just take up space and smell like motor oil. Your presence here is an insult to the work I do." A few passengers whisper, their voices a hiss of judgment. A man in a 3-piece suit leans over from 2A, adjusting his silk tie. "Probably doesn't even know how a jet engine works," he mutters with a smirk. "Just another lucky break on a discount site. They should really vet who they let into these seats." Daniel lowers his head, tightening his grip on Lily's hand. He feels her small thumb rubbing his palm, her way of comforting him. He doesn't explain. He doesn't tell them about the years he spent in the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, the king of the sky, or the 1,000+ hours he logged as a test pilot before the crash that took his wife and his career. He doesn't mention that he knows every bolt, every hydraulic line, and every line of code in this Boeing better than Victoria Hale knows her own reflection. He just sits there, absorbing her venom, choosing peace over pride for the sake of his sleeping child. He remembers his commander's words. A true pilot never fights the wind. He uses it. But then, the engine starts. Most people hear noise. Daniel hears a symphony. He feels the vibrations through the floorboards. His head tilts slightly. He hears the fuel pump struggling to prime, a sound like a heart skipping a beat. He hears a microscopic ping in the left turbine, a harmonic imbalance that shouldn't be there. It's a signature of a failing bearing, a sound he's heard in a dozen simulations. As the plane climbs into the dark night, Victoria is busy typing away on her gold-plated laptop, closing a $30 million acquisition. She is oblivious, wrapped in her digital fortress. Daniel, however, puts his palm flat against the armrest, feeling the airframe groan. His eyes change. The submissive father is gone. His pupils dilate. In his place is a predator of the skies, sensing a predator in the wind long before anyone else. The plane reaches 30,000 feet, cruising through a sea of black velvet. Suddenly, the world turns upside down. A massive, bone-jarring shudder rocks the aircraft, throwing laptops onto the floor and sending a tray of crystal glasses shattering against the bulkhead. The oxygen masks drop from the ceiling, bright yellow plastic ghosts dangling in the air, mocking the passengers' sudden gasps for breath. The fasten seatbelt sign flashes a panicked red, accompanied by a frantic ding, ding, ding. The cabin lights flicker and die, replaced by the eerie, pulsing glow of emergency floor strips. The flight attendants, usually so composed, are stumbling, their faces masked with genuine, raw terror. One of them is thrown against the galley door, clutching her arm in pain. Victoria Hale, the woman who owned the world 10 minutes ago, is now clutching her armrests so hard her designer rings are cutting into her skin. She looks around, her eyes wild, looking for someone to blame, but the sky doesn't recognize her title or her bank balance. Lily wakes up screaming, the sudden drop in cabin pressure making her ears throb. Daniel pulls her into his lap, his voice a low, rhythmic hum that somehow pierces through the chaos. "Look at me, Lily. Eyes on me. Just like the stories, remember, we're just crossing the cloud bridge. The sky is just stretching its wings. Breathe with me. 1, 2, 3. His calm is unnatural. It is the calm of a man who has looked into the abyss so many times that the abyss finally blinked. He can feel the plane pitching down. 10 degrees, 15 degrees. The autopilot is disengaging. He hears the faint cavalry charge warning from the cockpit. He monitors the angle of attack through the tilt of his own body. He senses the rudder fluttering unnaturally. The plane is screaming in a language only he understands. From the left wing, a loud, sickening clack echoes, the sound of titanium failing under extreme stress. Daniel closes his eyes for 3 seconds, visualizing the wing's internal structure based on the vibration. Main spar is holding, but the outboard flap actuator is gone. Secondary hydraulic line has severed. We're bleeding fluid at a critical rate. The control surfaces are going to freeze. The intercom crackles. It isn't the smooth, professional voice of a pilot anymore. It's the voice of a man who knows he's about to become a headline. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a catastrophic technical malfunction. Both our primary and backup flight control systems are unresponsive. The computer it's locked us out. We are losing altitude at 4,000 feet per minute." A pause, a breath of pure, unadulterated static that sounds like a death rattle. Is there anyone on board with heavy aircraft experience? A pilot? Please. Anyone? The cabin falls into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the wind howling outside the fuselage. The air is thick with the smell of ozone and the sound of muffled prayers. Victoria looks around frantically. The important people, the lawyers who bill $500 an hour, the tech bros, the venture capitalists, are all frozen. They are masters of the boardroom, but they are useless in a metal tube falling from the sky at 500 miles per hour. One executive is literally weeping into his silk pocket square, his prestige now a useless scrap of fabric. Victoria's breath is coming in ragged, ugly gasps. She looks at Daniel. He is still holding Lily, but he is no longer looking at her. He is looking at the overhead panels, counting the flashes of the emergency lights. He is calculating the glide slope in his head. He knows they have less than 6 minutes before they hit the water or the dark mountains below. Lily looks up at her father, her tears drying as she sees the familiar captain look in his eyes. The look he gets when he fixes her broken toys with impossible precision. She whispers, "Daddy, you told me you used to fly the sun when the angels got tired. Go fly the sun now. Save the people." Daniel looks at his daughter, then at the terrified faces around him. He sees a teenage boy clutching a Bible. He sees an elderly couple holding hands, waiting for the end with a quiet dignity. He sees Victoria, whose eyes are now wide with a pathetic childlike fear, her facade of power stripped away by the cold reality of physics. He realizes that his pride, his resentment, and his desire to stay hidden don't matter anymore. Only their lives do. He gently kisses Lily's forehead, his voice a promise. "Stay here. Don't let go of the bunny. I'll be right back." He unbuckles his seatbelt and stands up. Daniel stands up in a cabin that is bucking like a wild animal. The floor is slanted at a terrifying angle, but he doesn't stumble. He walks toward the cockpit with the grace of a man walking on solid ground, his feet finding the rhythm of the plane's struggle. He brushes past a panicked passenger who is trying to open an overhead bin, his movements precise and focused. Victoria reaches out and grabs his sleeve as he passes. Her hand is trembling so much her watch is rattling. "What are you doing? Sit down. You're going to get us all killed. You're just a mechanic. You'll break something. You don't have the clearance." Daniel stops. He doesn't look down at her with spite. He looks at her with a profound, terrifying pity. "I am the man you said didn't belong here," he says, his voice like cold iron. "Now, if you want to see tomorrow, let go of my arm. The sky doesn't care about your money, Victoria. It only cares about who can handle the stick. And right now, I'm the only stick you've got." The man in the three-piece suit who had mocked him earlier lets out a shaky, hysterical laugh, his face green. You're a grease monkey. Stay out of the cockpit. You'll doom us all. This isn't a movie, kid." Daniel doesn't argue. He slowly rolls up his left sleeve. Tanned into his skin and marked by a faded silver-threaded pin on his undershirt is the emblem of the Elite Air Force Test Command, the Ghost Riders. Below it is a purple heart and a set of coordinates. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross," he says, the authority in his voice slamming the cabin into silence. "I've landed a burning Raptor on a highway in a sandstorm with no radar. Move." The mockery evaporates instantly, replaced by a desperate, hungering hope. The lead flight attendant, seeing the absolute steel in his eyes and the way he stands, doesn't ask for a license or a badge. She knows leadership when she sees it. She swipes her emergency key card and ushers him through the door. Inside the cockpit, it is a symphony of failure. Red lights are pulsing like a heartbeat, and the pull-up alarm is a rhythmic, mechanical scream. The captain is slumped over his yoke, unconscious from a massive stroke caused by the sudden cabin decompression. The co-pilot is barely 25, his face a mask of sweat and tears. His hands are locked on the controls, fighting the computer. "I can't override it," he yells over the sirens. "The Hailtech OS has frozen the control surfaces. It's thinking for itself. It's trying to suicide us." Daniel slides into the captain's seat. The smell of hot electronics and hydraulic fluid fills his lungs. It smells like destiny. It smells like the day he survived his own crash. "It's not a lockout, son," Daniel says, his hands already dancing across the overhead breakers with a speed the co-pilot can't follow. "It's a feedback loop in the auxiliary pressure system. The computer thinks we're stalled because the sensors are iced over, so it's forcing the nose down to save us. You're fighting the software. Stop fighting it. Feel the air." He reaches up and kills the master computer bus. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the cockpit goes completely dark. The alarms stop. The silence is worse than the noise. Then the manual backup systems whine to life. Daniel takes the yoke. It's heavy, 3 tons of physical pressure, but he moves it like it's an extension of his own nervous system. He begins a sequence of manual overrides that haven't been taught in civilian flight schools for decades. Victoria Hale's code is brilliant, Daniel mutters to the co-pilot as he wrestles the beast. But she never accounted for a physical debris strike in the sensor housing. It's blinded by its own intelligence. We have to fly by the seat of our pants now. Just you, me, and the wind. Trust the machine, but master the soul. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose of the plane begins to rise. The screaming of the wind against the fuselage softens from a shriek to a steady, powerful roar. Daniel feels the sweet spot in the controls, the moment the plane stops fighting him and starts flying for him. Down in the cabin, the passengers feel the shift. The terrifying tilt of the floor levels out. The weight of gravity returns to their chests, grounding them. Victoria Hale sits back, her face buried in her trembling hands. Every insult she hurled at him, every sneer about his worn-out shirt, is a hot coal in her throat. She is a billionaire, a genius, a CEO, and she is completely, utterly irrelevant to the survival of 300 souls. The plane stabilizes at 10,000 feet just above the clouds. Daniel clicks the radio. "This is Daniel Cross. We are level. We are under manual control. We are going to be on the ground in 20 minutes. To the lady in seat 1A, I hope the ride is comfortable enough for you now. My apologies for the motor oil smell." A pause, then his voice softens, breaking the pilot persona for a second. "Lily, baby, Daddy's coming back to his seat soon. Just hold on to that, bunny." The cabin doesn't just cheer, it weeps. People are hugging strangers. Victoria just stares at the cockpit door, her entire philosophy of life, that technology and wealth are the ultimate shields, shattered into a million pieces. The plane touches the runway at O'Hare with a softness that seems almost supernatural, a greaser landing that most pilots can only dream of. As the wheels meet the tarmac, a roar of human gratitude erupts that is louder than the engines. It is the sound of 300 people being born again. When the cabin door opens, the tarmac is a sea of blue and red lights. Emergency crews, fire trucks, and federal agents are everywhere. Daniel walks out of the cockpit, his shirt soaked in sweat, his hands still slightly shaking from the physical exertion of the manual yoke. He looks just as tired and ordinary as he did when he boarded. He doesn't wait for the cameras or the medals. He walks straight to the last row of business class. Lily doesn't just run to him, she launches herself into his arms. "I knew it, Daddy! I knew you could fly the sun!" As the passengers are ushered off, the hierarchy of the cabin has completely dissolved. The man in the 3-piece suit stops Daniel, looks at his own expensive shoes and whispers, "I am a coward and a fool. Thank you for my life. I will never look at a man's shirt the same way again." Then comes Victoria. She is the last to leave the plane. Her designer coat is forgotten on her seat. Her hair is a mess, and her mascara is ruined by tears. She walks up to Daniel, and for the first time in her life, she doesn't look at his clothes or his social status. She looks into his eyes, eyes that have seen the edge of the world and come back. In front of the flight crew, the paramedics, and the remaining passengers, the most powerful woman in aviation tech bows her head. "I am so sorry," she says, her voice breaking into a sob. "I judged you because I am a small broken person who thought power was something you could buy. You saved my life, even after I tried to strip you of your humanity. You are more of a pilot than any machine I ever built." She tells him then, through tears, why she was so cruel. She lost her father in a crash when she was a child, a crash that was blamed on pilot error. She had spent her whole life trying to build machines that didn't need people, because she didn't trust people to be perfect. She had turned into a monster to hide her fear of losing someone again. She thought that by mocking unimportant people, she could keep the world at a distance. Daniel looks at her, then at the emblem on his sleeve. "A machine is just metal and code, Victoria. It has no soul. It can't feel the wind, it can't feel a daughter's hand, and it can't choose to sacrifice itself for a stranger. Don't build better machines to replace us. Build better people to guide them. The story doesn't stay on the tarmac. A passenger had recorded the moment Daniel stood up, and another had recorded Victoria's tearful apology. By the time the sun rises, the ghostwriter dad is the global headline. But it isn't just about the heroic landing. It's about the shift in the social fabric. People are sharing stories of the invisible heroes in their own lives. The janitors who are poets, the mechanics who are veterans, the single parents who are warriors. Victoria Hale does something no one expected. She doesn't hire a PR firm to spin the story. She doesn't try to bury the video. Instead, she goes on national television and plays the recording of her mocking Daniel. She uses her own shame as a catalyst for a global movement called the Human Altitude, a foundation dedicated to mental health and career transitions for veterans in the invisible workforce. The cabin of that plane became a sanctuary of awakening for a whole generation who realized that everyone is carrying a hidden cockpit inside them. Community CTA, I will look behind the surface. I will live a decent life. Daniel Cross is offered the world. Major airlines offer him chief pilot positions with seven-figure salaries. Victoria offers him the vice presidency of her company. Talk shows offer him millions for a 5-minute interview. He turns every single one of them down with a quiet smile. I already have the best job in the world, he tells the reporters gathered on his lawn. I'm Lily's dad, and the hangar is where I belong. The planes need someone who loves them even when they're broken. He goes back to his small house and his job at the regional hangar. He still wears the faded flannel shirt and the grease-stained coveralls. But something has fundamentally changed. When he walks through the airport, the pilots, the ones in the crisp gold-striped uniforms, snap to attention and salute him as he passes. The janitors high-five him. The passengers who recognize him don't just see a mechanic, they see a reminder that greatness often wears a worn-out shirt and carries a child's stuffed bunny. Victoria Hale doesn't disappear into her ivory tower either. She quietly sets up a trust fund for Lily that ensures she will never have to worry about anything again. But more than that, Victoria starts showing up at the hangar. She sits on an oil drum, drinking cheap coffee from a foam cup with Daniel, listening to him talk about how a wing actually feels the air in a way a sensor never can. She learns about the soul of flight. She stops flying private jets. She starts booking the last row of economy on purpose. She sits next to the single moms with crying babies. She sits next to the struggling students and the tired laborers. She offers to hold their bags. She shares her snacks, and she listens. She realizes that her $30 million deals were nothing compared to the wealth of a human story shared in the quiet of a long flight. One question changed the course of 300 lives that night. Is there a pilot here? It was a question for the cockpit, but it was also a question for the world. We are all on this flight together, hurtling through the dark, uncertain of the future. And when the engines fail and the lights flicker, it won't be our bank accounts, our titles, or our designer clothes that save us. It will be the man in the faded shirt who has the courage to stand up, the child who has the faith to believe, and the enemy who has the humility to say, I was wrong. Forgive me. Daniel Cross proved that the sky doesn't care who you are. It is the great equalizer. But the earth remembers what you did when the sky was falling. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment and subscribe to TT Healing Tales. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Tell us, who is the invisible hero in your life?